Imagine you're a crow sitting on a telephone wire in downtown Tokyo. Below you, 8 million people rush past each other in every direction without making eye contact. They stare at glowing rectangles in their palms. They drink hot brown liquid from paper cups and throw the cups away 3 minutes later. They wear pieces of dead animals on their feet. They run even when nothing is chasing them. What on earth would you make of that? Here's the thing, most people assume animals don't think about us at all. They see us as part of the background, tall, weird smelling furniture that occasionally throws breadcrumbs. Harmless, predictable, ignorable. That assumption is not just wrong, it is spectacularly, embarrassingly, fascinatingly wrong. The science of animal cognition has exploded over the last 30 years, and what researchers have found is that animals don't just notice us, they study us, they categorize us, they remember us individually, they warn each other about specific people, they form opinions, and in some cases, they are watching you with a level of attention and intelligence that should make you feel genuinely self-conscious the next time you walk past a pigeon. What will you feel if those crows are the one following and spying on you? Comment your reactions and emotions down below. This isn't sentimentality. This isn't projecting human feelings onto creatures that don't deserve it. This is neuroscience, behavioral research, and decades of field observation pointing at the same uncomfortable conclusion. Animals have a far more sophisticated model of who and what you are than you have ever given them credit for. So let's talk about what they actually see when they look at us. Because the answer is stranger, more humbling, and more profound than almost anything you were taught in school. Let's start with recognition, because this is where most people's minds get broken the first time they hear it. In 2011, researchers at the University of Washington ran a series of experiments with American crows. They wore specific masks when capturing and banding wild crows for research. Neutral masks, threatening masks. Then they walked around campus wearing those same masks months later, sometimes years later. The crows that had been captured by the threatening mask, they remembered they dive-bombed the researchers wearing that specific mask. They scolded them. They recruited other crows who had never even been captured to join in the harassment. The information about which face was dangerous had spread through the crow community like a news broadcast. Think about what that actually means. A crow saw a specific human face during a stressful encounter, distorted it, cross-referenced it against every face it saw afterward for years, and communicated a description of a dangerous individual to members of its social group who passed on the warning themselves. That is not instinct, that is not a reflex, that is a functioning intelligence gathering and communication network, and you are in the database. And crows are not the only ones. Elephants can identify specific humans by the smell of their clothing. Researchers in Kenya found that elephants reacted with intense alarm to garments worn by Maasai men who have historically hunted elephants but showed almost no reaction to garments worn by Kamba men who largely do not. Same species, same general scent profile, completely different response. They had built a cultural profile of two different human groups and encoded it into collective memory passed down through generations. The elephants in Amboseli National Park in Kenya are estimated to have recognized over 250 individual humans by scent and appearance. 250. Most humans cannot name 250 people they have personally met. Now here is where it gets genuinely unsettling. Animals don't just recognize individual humans, they read us constantly with an accuracy that should make every poker player in the world deeply nervous. Dogs can detect elevated cortisol in your sweat before you are consciously aware that you are stressed. They are reading your internal emotional state through chemistry in real time. Your dog frequently knows you are anxious before you do. Horses assess your posture, your breathing rate, your eye contact, and the tension in your body in the first seconds of meeting you, and they form a judgment that largely holds. Experienced equestrians will tell you that a horse decides whether it trusts you within moments of approach. After that, you spend the rest of the relationship either confirming or undermining that initial rid. The horse was watching while you walked across the paddock. It clocked your gait. It noted whether your shoulders were forward or back. It listened to your breathing. You thought you were just walking to the horse. The horse was already conducting an interview. Octopuses, which are so neurologically alien to us that their nervous system is distributed throughout their arms and they share a common ancestor with humans from over 500 million years ago, can still distinguish between individual human handlers. In aquarium settings, some octopuses have been documented expressing consistent preferential behavior towards specific staff members and consistent aversion toward others, sometimes spraying the ones they dislike with jets of water from their their tanks when those particular humans walked past. The octopus made a social judgment, and it acted on it every single day. But let's go deeper, because recognition and emotional reading are only the beginning. What do animals actually make of human behavior? And this is where the research gets philosophically destabilizing. In a landmark study of wild bonobos in the Democratic Republic of Congo, researchers observed what happened when humans entered the bonobos' territory. The bonobos didn't flee, they watched, and they watched differently depending on which humans appeared. They had developed distinct behavioral protocols for researchers who had been habituated with them versus unknown humans. They had a concept of stranger versus familiar that they applied to an entirely different species. But more striking than that, great apes have been repeatedly observed watching humans perform tasks and then attempting to replicate the method they observed. In the Thai forest in Ivory Coast, wild chimpanzees watched researchers open latch boxes to retrieve food inside. Later, given access to similar boxes, those chimpanzees did not use force. They specifically attempted to replicate the latch opening method they had observed in the humans, even though that technique was not part of their natural behavioral repertoire. They watched a human do something. They stored it as a potentially useful technique, and they tried to copy it. You are a learning resource, an instructional video that walks around and sometimes gives snacks. The implications of this run in both directions. If chimpanzees learn from watching humans, then they are also learning from watching our failures, our conflicts, our cruelties. Researchers who study primates in sanctuary settings after those animals have been exposed to abuse by humans describe a kind of complex wariness that goes beyond fear. The primates don't just avoid humans who hurt them. They develop cautious, almost investigative behaviors toward all new humans, spending extended periods assessing intent before allowing proximity. They have generated a category: human who can be trusted, human who cannot unknown, verdict pending. They are running a continuous background evaluation on every member of our species they encounter. Let's talk about what animals think about our intelligence, because the results here are genuinely humbling. In study after study, animals demonstrate that they understand human limitations in specific targeted ways. African gray parrots, when tested on their ability to track hidden objects, consistently outperform human children under the age of 4. They understand object permanence, the concept that something still exists when you can't see it, more reliably than toddlers do. But the interesting part isn't the raw performance. It is that in controlled experiments, African gray parrots behave differently when they think a human is watching them versus when they believe they are unobserved. When watched by an attentive human, they will attempt solutions they believe the human might find acceptable or useful. When unobserved, they choose faster, less methodical approaches. They know they are being evaluated, and they modulate their performance accordingly. Ravens, who are to the crow family what theoretical physicists are to the general public, have been shown to understand pointing gestures immediately on first exposure. That sounds trivial until you realize that dogs, after 15,000 years of coevolution with humans, are the only other non-primate species that reliably follows human pointing with an understanding of its communicative intent. Ravens figured it out independently. They looked at what a human finger was doing and understood that the finger was trying to communicate a location. Without training, without prior contact with humans, they read our communicative behavior and decoded its intent on the spot. Meanwhile, dolphins in Shark Bay, Australia, have been observed in something that researchers describe with great caution, but cannot entirely avoid calling teaching. Adult female dolphins have been documented walking their calves through human boat traffic patterns in the bay with apparent deliberateness, showing them which human vessels were safe to approach and which to avoid, using levels of behavioral scaffolding that look remarkably like instruction. The dolphin mothers appear to have built a model of human maritime behavior complex enough that they are now passing it on to the next generation as survival knowledge. They have, in other words, added understanding humans to the curriculum of dolphin childhood. Now here's the part most people find the most uncomfortable. What do animals think of our emotional state? And more specifically, what do they do with that information? In 2019, a study published in the journal Learning and Behavior demonstrated that horses can not only distinguish between photographs of humans with happy expressions and humans with angry expressions, but they remember both, and they respond to the actual person in a way that is consistent with the photograph they saw. Horses shown an angry photograph of a human handler later reacted to that handler in person with elevated heart rate and avoidance behaviors, even when the handler was expressing a neutral or calm face. The horse had stored the angry version as the truth. It saw a flash of who you were at your worst, and it updated its model of you accordingly. The research on dogs goes further still. Dogs have been documented in multiple studies exhibiting what researchers call emotional contagion, where they pick up and mirror the emotional state of a human they are bonded to with such fidelity that their cortisol levels rise when their owner's cortisol levels rise, even in the absence of any obvious environmental stressor. The dog is sad because you are sad, and critically, the dog has no idea why you are sad, because you won't explain it, and it has been sitting there for 3 hours genuinely concerned about you, and you have not even acknowledged that it noticed. That is not a metaphor, that is a measurable biochemical reality. And elephants, let's return to elephants because they may deserve more credit than any other species in this conversation. Elephants in Zimbabwe have been documented approaching grieving elephants and making physical contact in ways that closely resemble human comforting behavior. They also extend this behavior to grieving humans. In documented encounters near Amboseli, elephants that had long associations with a specific wildlife researcher who later died were observed gathering near the site where his body was buried, spending time there and touching the ground with their trunks. Did they know he was dead? Did they understand loss in the way humans do? The honest scientific answer is that we cannot be certain, but we can say that those elephants identified something significant about the absence of a specific human they had known, gathered in a location associated with him, and engaged in physical behaviors they also use when processing the deaths of their own. That is not nothing. That is, at minimum, a complex social response to the disappearance of someone they had built a relationship with across years. Here is the part that changes everything once you sit with it long enough. For most of human history, we have defined our intelligence partly by contrast with other animals. We think abstractly, they don't. We use language, they don't. We plan for the future, they don't. We form complex social relationships with individuals we remember across years, they don't. But every single one of those distinctions has been eroded or collapsed by research in the last few decades. Abstract thought, demonstrated in pigeons trained to sort photographs into categories they had never seen before. Language. Chimpanzees and gorillas who learned American Sign Language used it to generate novel sentences and, in documented cases, to lie. Future planning. Ravens and scrub jays who hide food in locations they return to, days later accounting for competitors who might have watched them cache it. Complex remembered social relationships. Elephants, dolphins, primates, corvids, and now a growing list of species whose social worlds are far more intricate than we had any reason to suspect. The question is not whether animals are aware of us, they are. The question is what kind of awareness it is. And the answer, increasingly, is that it is a kind of awareness shaped by experience, memory, cultural transmission, and something that functions like judgment. They are not watching us the way a camera watches. They are watching us the way a child watches an unpredictable adult, with attention, with assessment, with hope or wariness depending on prior experience, with the accumulated knowledge of their group behind them and a continuous updating model of what you are, what you want, and whether you are safe. You have been alive your entire life, and you have moved through a world full of minds that were watching you, sizing you up, remembering you, teaching their children about you, deciding, based on what you did and how you carried yourself, whether you were something to trust or something to fear. Most people walk through that world completely unaware of it. They see animals as background characters, as nature's wallpaper, as creatures acting on instinct with no inner life worth considering. But the fox that watches you from the tree line while you walk the same trail every morning at 7:15 has a model of you. It knows your schedule, it knows you're usually carrying something, it knows you've never once looked up at it. It has decided you're not a threat. The crow outside your kitchen window remembers that you threw bread crusts out there 6 months ago and occasionally checks back to see if you're the kind of person who does that consistently. It has filed you under possibly reliable. The dog in your house is tracking your emotional state right now with biochemical precision that no medical instrument can match and has been doing so every day since it met you, quietly, devotedly, without asking for anything except to be occasionally acknowledged. We spent a long time asking what separates us from animals. The more interesting question is what we share, and the answer, it turns out, is more than any of us were taught: awareness, memory, social learning, emotional response, the ability to form lasting judgments about specific individuals that persist across time. The animals were never just background, they were always watching, and if you have ever been kind to a creature that could not tell you in words what that meant to it, know this: it registered, it was filed, it updated a model, and somewhere in the extraordinary machinery of a mind built by millions of years of evolution to pay close attention to the world it lives in, you were recorded as safe. That is not a small thing. That might be the most human thing about us. That it matters to us whether we are seen that way. We always thought we were the ones doing the watching. We were never the only ones. If this video sparked your curiosity, leave a like and subscribe for more fascinating stories and discoveries.